So thank you guys for joining me today. And all right, we're doing this deep dive. Typically we do one every month, and this is where we're free to go into the weeds as much as we want. So if you guys are with me, you can ask questions, you can type it in the chat, you can unmute yourself and ask me a question. With this format, the way I'm sharing the screen, I don't see everybody's picture at the same time. So you might need to click the little webinar button at the bottom to raise your hand. But again, we want to get into the weeds of these things and really make sure that you guys have a good understanding of these policies that we're going to talk about. Now, when I came up with the topics, I asked my staff. We've got Jake and Ingrid in Salt Lake and Paige down in Utah County. I said, what kind of questions are you guys getting? Because we tend to get common themed questions, right? And lately, the questions that we've been getting is I'll address the first one really quickly. And well, actually, no, I'm going to put that to the back. It's how do we do the commission forms? And we've already kind of done a video on that. So I'll address that later on if we have time. But what I want to talk about is the ones that I'm running against problems with literally every day, multiple times a day, with realtors calling me to ask questions. Okay. And for example, yesterday I talked to a real estate agent, good agent, and he sent me a picture. He took a screenshot of his or a picture on his phone of his form, and he sent it to me and says, "How does this language look?" And I said, "Hey, that's great, but we have a form for it." And so I told him, it's like we got the resolution of due diligence form because he had asked ChatGPT. He said, "Hey, ChatGPT, can you create some language for me?" He's like, "I think this is pretty good language." It says, "Yeah, but we've got a form already for that. And so let's dissect both of those forms, the one that ChatGPT made for you and the one that we already have existing for us." And we went through the pros and cons of both. And the form that the UAR has for us is so much better than what ChatGPT came up with. ChatGPT is great, right? I mean, we're all big fans of the new toys, but it doesn't replace the decades of trial and error, basically, that we have the with the UAR attorneys in creating the forms. And so I want to dive into some of these because he says, "How could I have been doing this for so long?" Now, granted, he hasn't been in my office this whole time. This is one of the offices that we picked up this last year. "How could I have been doing this for so long and not know the resolution of due diligence form even existed?" I said, "That's a good question right there." And so, anyways, top of mind, we're going to be talking about that one right now. So let's go to, first of all, the law. Anytime we do a deep dive, I like to show you the basis for it. So we're going to jump into the law first. Let's see here. Okay, where do we find these laws? First of all, if you go to realestate.utah.gov, up at the top, scroll down just a little bit. In fact, I can show you the pathway right here. So this is realestate.utah.gov. Scroll down just a little bit, click the real estate button. Then you can scroll down a little bit more, and you've got a couple of options over here. Okay. So what we're looking for is, well, we're going to go into forms first of all. That'll be part of the training, but we're looking for the statutes and administrative rules. And when we click on that, we've got a couple of different formats that come up. Most agents are more familiar with this administrative rules. It's a little bit easier to navigate. When we click on administrative rules, it pulls up this real estate section, and it just like the whole section is right here. It's just a question of how much time do you have to read everything, right? And you can scroll down through all of this, and eventually you can mostly find your answers. However, not every time. There are some laws that I've had agents run afoul of in the past. In fact, Marvin's on with me today. He asked me about one because he read the division's newsletter. If you didn't read the division newsletter, there were some pretty hefty fines given out this last quarter. And he emailed me and he said, "Hey, what's wrong with this one? I want to make sure I'm doing things right," which I love about that. Thank you, Marvin. And so when we go into these, there's another one, these administrative rules. And when we click on the, oh, sorry, wrong one. When we go into this Real Estate Licensing and Practices Act, this is where some of the rules are that are a little bit more hidden. So you look at this and it's not easy to scroll through, right? Like it's not just one big page where you can just keep scrolling down and try to find your answers. There's a bunch of little parts, and I click on that, and boy, that didn't make it easier to read, did it? So this is the challenge that we have sometimes is knowing these rules, because in the case of the wholesaler, I think it was a $30,000 fine. Does that sound right, Marvin? I think it was a $30,000 fine for the wholesaler. We could,
I think it was 60.
was it 60?
He was 60, and he was a not a wholesaler. He was an agent.
Right, he was an agent, but I think he was wholesaling.
Yeah, some type of wholesaling deal with the
So let's see,
real estate.
enforcement. So if you want to know what those are, you can go to enforcement, go to newsletters. Like I said, this is where we can go down rabbit holes. So just bear with me. Go to 2025. Last quarter was just released, I think last week. Um, Normally you can see it all here. They're just giving us a link to go to the PDF version. And got to move this so that we can scroll all the way to the bottom of it. But we get down here to the violations, and yeah, it was oh yeah, civil penalty of 60,000 that would be reduced to 30,000 if he transferred title of the property to the seller in the foreclosure rescue transaction. So he had to transfer title back, and then he was only penalized 30,000. Otherwise, it was 60,000. So pretty crazy. There was another one where there was outright fraud, one of the biggest fines I've ever seen, $192,000, where somebody was outright committing fraud within their company. So, anyways, yeah, lots of fun stuff in this last newsletter. So Marvin emailed me and said, "Hey, I want to make sure that I understand this, how it works and stuff." So we were able to go through it a little bit together. But anyways, that's where you can find the newsletters. Is in there. Let me go back a little bit. So we were going to look at statutes and administrative rules, and I just clicked out of the one that I had already found for you and pulled up. So we're going to see if we can find it here pretty quickly by clicking through these things. Don't think it was there. No provisions. It's not there. Sorry, I'd already found this before we got started. It always takes me a little bit of looking around. Oh, here we are, 306. Okay, so this is the section, rights and privileges of real estate licensees to fill out forms or documents. And this is where I see people getting in trouble a lot because they don't understand the basic rules of this section. This comes into play more so with investors, I think, than regular real estate agents, because investors are faced with a lot of challenging scenarios and we've got the creative financing, right? And I use the whatever bunny ears, whatever these are called, creative financing, because sometimes that's just another word for we're trying to find ways to commit fraud and not get caught, right? There is a very clear black and white. There's a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things. And we'll talk a little bit about wholesaling today because there is a right way to do it. It's not wrong, it's not illegal, but there are wrong ways to do these things, as well as that, foreclosure rescue stuff. Okay. So for this section right here, let's read through this law so that we understand it really well. So the first thing is, except as provided in subsection 2. So this is the exceptions. A real estate licensee may fill out only those legal forms approved by the commission and the attorney general and those forms provided by statute. Okay. So section 1 says we can only fill out forms approved by the commission and attorney general. How do we find out what those forms are? And what are they? Does anybody know?
Is there some sort of a logo on there that will tell us?
Okay. Yeah, actually. if you go to the form section of the MLS, that's not it. That's not it. And these were the forms I had. So if we open up a new tab, we go down to forms. I think what you're talking about is a lot of these have this little asterisk or 3 asterisks. And if you scroll way down to the bottom, see here, it tells you this form is provided courtesy of the Utah Division of Real Estate. So the ones with 3 asterisks, there's an easier way to find it. We can go, okay, we're going to go back to Division of Real Estate. We're going to scroll down here. If you want to find it, there's forms, and here's the state approved forms. Okay, so if you want to know which one section 1 is referring to, here's all of our options. Real estate purchase contract, we're all familiar with that. We all use it all the time. FHA VA loan addendum, we're familiar with that. We use that on all the FHA VA deals that we have. Seller financing, we don't use that all the time, but it is a state approved form. And again, if we go back to that law, except as provided in subsection 2, we can only fill out legal forms approved by the Commissioner and the Attorney Generals, and those forms provided by statute. So we should be very familiar with these forms here on this list. We got the blank addendum. Okay, super helpful, right? This is what realtors use mostly to get in trouble, because they take the blank addendum and then they make up their own language, not knowing that other forms with language exist. We've got the holding the earnest money with title company addendum, an assumption addendum to the REPC. And then we've got a few random forms that a lot of times we don't use. We got the lead-based paint disclosure, lead-based paint addendum, all-inclusive trust deed, which we really don't use, the all-inclusive promissory note, which we really don't use. So out of this list, there's like 3 or 4 forms that we use every day in real estate. And you contrast that with, if I'm going to go up here, and since I'm already at the bottom with my scrolling, look at all of these forms that we have access to. Only 3 or 4 of those are the ones that the state has provided to us. So I've been getting several calls this week because the last couple of months, different boards have their board dues come up. Most of you have probably already paid. Cache Valley came up this month. They sent out their letter saying, hey, everybody's due. And I have agents calling me saying, why do I have to pay this fee? Like, this seems like such garbage. I don't go to the parties. I don't do the things. And I said, well, part of the fees are local. That's your local board dues. And it's about 1/3 there, maybe a little bit more than 1/3. And then about 1/3 go to the state. And the state is what creates most of these forms for us. Like, these aren't provided to us courtesy of the MLS. These are provided to us by the UAR attorneys, who then provide it to the MLS. And that's how we get access to it. So this is a lot of what our dues go for, are for legal stuff. Okay. It also helps with the formation of laws and RPAC and all of that. So anyways, there's a lot of value here, right? This is 99% of the tools in your toolbox when we look at this huge list and realize that the state right here only gives us access to about 4 that we use on a regular basis. So now that we know that what we can only fill out is about 4 forms, right? Except as provided in subsection 2. So let's look at those. 2A are forms associated with closings. So a principal broker or a branch broker or an associate broker could fill out documents associated with the closing of a real estate transaction. Now, do we do that in Utah? Not really. We typically have this done at a title company. I don't know why I would want to assume that legal responsibility or liability without a title company there. So this is almost never used, but this one is used. So except as provided in subsection 2, you can only fill out the 4 or 5 forms that we saw on the division's website. So subsection 2 has this exception, that you can fill out real estate forms prepared by the legal counsel of the buyer, seller, lessor, or lessee. So if your clients get an attorney, can you use the forms that their attorneys have created? I've probably had this question 3 times this week. If your clients get an attorney, can you use the forms that their attorney has created? What do you guys think? You guys, I'm asking you questions. I want to make sure that you understand. Monica, you've unmuted yourself. If your client hires an attorney and they draft their own form, can you use it?
I would say you're you're working for that client for their best interest. And if they've hired an attorney to represent them and they've asked you to help fill out the forms that they provide, then probably yes, because you're working for them.
Yeah, the answer is yes. If they hire an attorney and that attorney creates forms, even if they create a form that's on this list, like their own real estate purchase contract. Like, for example, anybody work with a builder lately? They've typically hired attorneys to make up their own purchase contract, right? The smaller builders are using this standard form approved by the state, but none of the bigger builders are. They've all hired attorneys to make up their own. Now, in the absence of attorney, can we say, hey, ChatGPT, or I prefer Grok, but can we say, hey, ChatGPT or Grok, here's an example of a state-approved purchase contract. Can you draft me one similar to this, but, make a few adjustments? Can we do that and create our own? And I see Denise shaking her head no, and she is absolutely correct. Okay, you can't do that. That's called practicing law without a license, and you get in trouble for that. All right. So let's look at one last exception. So our clients can hire an attorney, or if the commission and the attorney general have not approved a specific form for the transaction, remember there's only like 5 or 6 that they have, right? If they have not approved a specific form for the transaction, this is the section we're reading, principal broker, associate broker, or sales agent may fill out real estate forms prepared by any legal counsel, including legal counsel retained by the brokerage to develop these forms. Now, here's the question. Can you, let's say you're faced with a fairly unique situation, can you call up your own attorney and say, hey, we need you to create some forms for us for this transaction? And you hire an attorney, and that attorney creates the forms, and boom, problem solved. Can you do that? No. Okay, Monica's shaking her head no. And she's correct, because it's legal counsel retained by the brokerage. So you don't get to hire your own legal counsel to develop forms. If they have not approved a specific form for the transaction, then you can fill out a form prepared by any legal counsel, including legal counsel retained by the brokerage to develop those forms. So if you're representing a client, don't get to hire your own attorney and make something up and not get it approved by me, right? Has anybody here, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can have a little heart-to-heart. Has anybody here ever worked with an attorney that they didn't think was the sharpest tool in the shed? If anybody here has ever worked with an attorney, then you have worked with an attorney that you didn't think was the sharpest tool in the shed. It was either yours or it was one on the other side. But guys, attorneys are just people like everybody else. They're not Superman. Okay, some of them are great. They do their job really well. Most of them are average. And there's a few of them that are really bad at their jobs, right? They draft language that creates problems. Has anybody here been to a closing with an attorney and watched them try to cross out lines of their closing paperwork in front of the title company? And the title company's like, you can't do that. This is documentation provided by, you cross that out and we're done here. You're not buying the house. Monica, you're nodding your head. Have you seen that?
Yes, when I was in the title company, we would often get attorney drafted contracts, and they would omit things or leave them out or have tons of misspellings or not quote the law correctly or whatever. And it would get people into real trouble. And we were like, why don't you use a real estate agent who has these forms? Like, we as agents pay our dues, so we do have attorneys working for us, and that's what they've provided for us, is these tried and true, been through the ringer documents, you know what I mean? So they can help us.
Yeah.
So yes, we do have attorneys working for us as agents, and that's what we need to remember, I think, but yes, if you are signed up to work for your clients and they do have an agent who's asking you to do stuff for it, okay, yeah, but you do have a brain in your head too, and you can say, you know what, maybe fix this one thing. I would, advise you to do that, because, you can say those things too, but just know that attorneys are very human, very human.
Thanks for sharing your title experience, because I have been there and I've seen them start to cross out stuff and the title company says, whoa, what are you doing? Well, I'm an attorney and I don't agree with this. And so we'll just line this out. We'll initial here. And they're like, no, you won't. Not if you want the loan. What do you mean? You have to sign exactly these forms, exactly as the lender provided it. You don't get to negotiate the terms, or you don't get the house, period, plain and simple, done. And they try to argue, and the title company's like, nope, not having it. Like, we're not here to negotiate. You're not gonna win this legal case or whatever. You want a loan from somebody you're asking somebody for a whole bunch of money. It's on their terms, period. Right? You can't change things at closing. And to me, it just blows my mind that somebody would be so naive or uneducated that they would think they could do that. Right? And so if they're that naive, why would I ever think that every form they ever created was bulletproof? So if an attorney, I'm going to go back to sharing the screen now. If you do have an attorney create something for you, just know that it could still have problems. So first of all, I want to stress right here that we could get legal counsel retained by the brokerage to develop forms. Have we done that? Yes, we have. We've got several instances of that. For example, the seller disclosure confirmation form. We were getting people that were stating because they were failing to disclose things. And then when they got sued, their attorney was coaching them to pin it on their agent, saying, oh, we had that conversation with our agent and they said we didn't need to disclose that. And boom, $250,000 lawsuit lands in the lap of the agent. Right? And they couldn't prove that they had had that conversation, but we couldn't prove that we hadn't had that conversation. And just the fight itself, Errors and Omissions stepped in and says, yeah, we'll settle this, right? Pretty scary. By the way, if you haven't watched the Errors and Omissions training, there's links to that in our newsletter. It might be an interesting one for you to go watch. Anyways, so we had our attorney create a form that we make as a required part of our packet. And those types of lawsuits have almost completely disappeared, because now people have signed saying, we have not had any sidebar conversations with our agent where they told us not to disclose something. And that's great information to have for those people as well as for the agents, right? Because we don't have everybody on here getting training. There's a lot of agents that don't come to training. And so just the fact that we have that form helps partially educate them, saying, hey, I can't have sidebar conversations with my clients, and tell them, I don't think it's necessary to disclose that, right? That's good information for everyone to have. So the brokerage can develop some forms, but you should not be out developing your own forms to solve client problems, right? Are we all clear on that? Like, if you have to have an attorney involved for something, your clients can secure an attorney. They can create their forms. So legal counsel, forms created by legal counsel of the buyer, seller, or lessee. Now let's talk about the complication when because we have some investors on here, you're the agent and you're the client. You're representing yourself, you're an investor, and you're trying to solve problems where we don't have a form created by the commission that solves our problem, right? And so we're down here now to this C. The commissioner and attorney general have not approved a specific form for the transaction. And so we need something created. So if you are the principal in it, you're representing yourself either as a seller or as a buyer, and we don't have the correct forms, are you allowed to hire an attorney create forms for yourself? There's the question, right? So typically, if you're representing somebody else, my answer would be always no, you don't hire an attorney to help somebody else. They can hire their own attorney if they don't feel like our forms are sufficient, right? If they just want that extra backup, they feel like it's a comfort level for them. By the way, I don't think I've ever seen a form created by an attorney that was better than the ones that we have. And most of the time when agents, like I just reviewed this yesterday with an agent, she showed me the attorney created form and I said, okay, but they missed this and they missed this. And she said, oh yeah, we've talked about that and we're going to account for it, but it's not in the contract. Why is it not in the contract? Why wouldn't we just use our state approved form where all of this stuff that attorney created is there, plus we have these things that they missed, right? So just to be very clear, if we don't have a specific form that you might need for a transaction, you don't ever go out and hire an attorney to create that form for a buyer or seller that you represent. All right. The buyer or seller could hire an attorney. If they feel like there's not something that solves their problem, they can hire somebody. Now, if you are the buyer or seller and you feel like you need to get an attorney to create a form, then you should be calling me and saying, hey, I need, this is my situation. How do I solve this problem? And if we determine together that there isn't a form that exists, then you as a principal in the transaction, you have the right to hire an attorney, right? But it shouldn't be where forms already exist to solve the problem. Is there any question on this before I move to my next part of this argument? Okay, I don't see any questions on it. So now it comes down to, do you know all of the forms available to you, right? If I'm going to start making up forms to solve problems, then, and I can only do that when we don't have a specific form that we need prepared for us, then I should know what we already have prepared for us, right? And so this is where we go to our list of forms. And this is what I would recommend for everybody. This is what I would recommend for everybody that is on, well, for every agent, wherever, whether you're on this training or not, is that every week you schedule 1 hour, this would be considered maintenance, minimum of a half hour, but I do 30 minutes to an hour. And this is maintenance on your knowledge, where you just come in here and you start at the top of this list and you scroll down and you say, you know what, this week I'm going to make sure I understand all of these listing forms. And so you look at the first form, cancellation and termination of the exclusive right to sell listing agreement agency disclosure. And you think, you know what, I don't know all of the parts of that just off the top of my head. I could refresh that. So I jump into it, I pull it open, I scroll through and I read it all, not just to skim through and read it, because we've all done that to get through college or high school, right? Where we just like skim through something. I want you to read it and make sure that you understand the specific language in it, because it should be coming alive to you. And then the next time you do your homework, like the next day comes around, you say, you know what, I read that yesterday. I'm still pretty familiar with the problems that solves. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, I know this one. I know this one. I'm not totally sure about this one down here, right? This is a relatively new one. When would that come into play? How could I utilize that to help myself, to help my clients, right? This request to homeowners association, that's a relatively newer form. And each week I set aside a half hour to an hour. If I'm a brand new agent, I would be doing this every single day, 30 minutes to an hour. Just look at the number of forms that you need to learn how to use if you're a brand new agent. For you guys that have been licensed 10 years, still should be doing it half hour to an hour every day. And if you feel like you've got a fantastic hold on all of these forms, then you do what I do, and you come in and you go into statutes and administrative rules, this kind of stuff. And you will find things in here that you didn't know were in here. I guarantee it. Because there are things in here that agents have never. Again, I had a meeting where I had to terminate an agent a couple of weeks ago. And And I said, and it was this foreclosure rescue thing. And I said, I have never, ever seen a training on this. And he says, you're right. I don't think one exists. It's not in real estate school. It's not in any CE classes I've ever seen. I don't think this exists. And yet an agent just got a $60,000 fine for a law that they've never, ever seen and never gotten training on. But the law is there. It exists. And so if you get bored of the forms and you think, you know what, I know my forms really, really well, then you got 30 to 60 minutes carved out every week, and it's part of your habits of being an expert at your business. Okay. And you go into the law and you can read the law. But honestly, for most of us, learning all of these forms, that's a big enough ask right there, is knowing what's available to you. So on that topic, let's discuss a couple of forms that we have. I'm going to go into, the first one is the closing costs addendum. This is one that comes up all the time. It's one that I see agents making up language to all the time. And what we typically see is somebody using a blank addendum, which again, if we go over here, here's the blank addendum, right? Hey, I'm using a state-approved form. Yeah, but you're making up your own language. So let's look at the language that you made up and compare it with this language. Your language is seller to contribute up to $5,000 towards buyer's closing costs. Do y'all see that? Yeah? Okay, we've all seen that language written in there. Seller to contribute up to $5,000 towards buyer's closing costs. So we get to closing and we see that the buyer's closing costs were $3,000. But then they had prepaids, where you prepay your taxes and you prepay your homeowner's insurance, you prepay maybe a couple of other things, right? And the listing agent says, hey, we agreed to pay $5,000 of your closing costs. We did not agree to pay your prepaids. And now there's a dispute, right? Now, what if it's, let's use an example that's maybe more reasonable. What if there's $10,000 that we say for closing costs, and closing costs are $5,000, prepaids are a total of another $2,000. We've utilized $7,000, but we've negotiated for $10,000. See, anytime we make up our own language, we've harmed our clients, and we think we're doing the right thing because we said seller to pay up to $5,000 of buyer's closing costs. Pretty straightforward, right? No, because you don't understand these little details. If you're a new agent or if you're an experienced agent, you should know better, but don't. These little details matter. So we can be applied at buyer's discretion toward any or all of the following: a permanent reduction or temporary reduction in the mortgage loan interest rate, a buy down, like a 2-1 buy down, a 3-1 buy down. You could use that money to buy down the rate if you want to. And it's at the buyer's discretion. They don't have to get the seller's approval on how to use that money. They've got $10,000 that they negotiated. They can use it for any of these reasons. They can buy down their rate. Okay, could be a temporary thing. Mortgage financing costs. That's typically, some of the things built in, like paying for the appraisal, whatever. Closing costs, which is the only thing. Like if I hand wrote this and said to pay up to $10,000 of closing costs, I don't get A, I don't get B, I don't get D. Right? Prepaids or escrow. And then there should be maybe an E in here, because any unused portion can, at the buyer's option, be used to reduce the purchase price. I can use every penny of that $10,000 if I use the correct form. If I don't use the correct form, and the seller's agent makes an argument at closing saying, hey, we agreed to $5,000 close or $10,000 closing costs, you only have $5,000 closing costs here. You just lost your client $5,000 because you didn't use the correct form. So here's the question. Does that client have a potential lawsuit against you? Sure. They get talking around to other people and they say, we're so mad. We got to closing and, we feel like those sellers pulled a fast one. And the people they talk to say, your agent didn't use this form? Because this form covers all that. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. We wrote in there as plain as day. Seller to pay up $5,000 or $10,000 to buyer's closing costs. They only paid $5,000. And that person who's educated that they're complaining to says, yeah, there's a form. It solves all those problems. You wouldn't have had to deal with that. You could have used all $10,000 if your agent had used the proper form. And now it doesn't matter if your friend or family, best buddies from high school, they're upset at you because you just cost them $5,000 through your ignorance, right? So they contact you and they say, hey, we think you owe us $5,000 for this. And you say, I just spent that $5,000 to pay my mortgage. I don't have that money. And then they call an attorney. An attorney gets in here and they look at the details. And sure enough, it was your ignorance that cost them that $10,000 or that $5,000 that they didn't get. And you're paying attorney's fees and who knows what else. Once an attorney gets involved, they like to complicate things as much as possible. It increases their billable hours. But it was all because of your ignorance that you cost them this money. All right. So we need to know the tools that are available for us. And if we don't know those tools and we very innocently write in our own language that we think is clear and we get in trouble for it, there's some liability associated with that. All right, let's look at the next form that's kind of related to this, but this is the one where I had an agent say, I've been doing this for a long time. I didn't even know this form existed. How does this form exist and I haven't known about it? So let's dive into it. This is the resolution of due diligence addendum. Okay, it's like your repair addendum that I think we used to have at some point and it went away. So let's dive into this one. Why do we use this? This is what we use to solve the due diligence concerns. Anything that comes up with inspection should be resolved with this due diligence addendum, resolution of due diligence, okay? So we've got the parties at the top, and we, of course, have this language right here. The terms of this addendum are hereby incorporated as part of the REPC, and to the extent the terms of this addendum modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, including all prior addenda and counteroffer, these terms shall control. You see this language in every addendum. So please, when you're writing contracts, don't get into the habit of listing out all of the things that you agree with, saying we'll agree to point A, point B, point C of the last addendum, but we don't agree to this one, point D, and so this one should be changed to this. It's really confusing. And then you get like 15 pages of addenda. Nobody knows what's going on. The only thing that goes into an addendum or a counteroffer should be language that conflicts or modifies previous language. Okay. We don't put in saying, yes, we agree to the sales price of $600, but no, we don't agree to the closing costs of $5,000. We'll only agree to closing costs of $4,000, right? We don't do that. We simplify it. If we agree to the sales price of $600, we don't mention that at all. We just go in and we negotiate the thing that needs to change. So here's the thing that needs to change. We get to check the applicable boxes. Seller and buyer agree as follows. Now let's talk about this a little bit. There's a practical application to this that I'm going to coach you a little bit on because I had 5 years experience as a lender before this. And so when we look at our options 1, 2, and 3 here, they're listed, in my opinion, in order of legal preference, right? Because when we're negotiating repairs to be done, which that's what this is, it's the resolution of due diligence. So we've just had our inspection, we've got all these repairs to be done. There are ways that we can kill a deal, again, through our ignorance, right? And experienced agents know these tricks and inexperienced don't. And sometimes it's shocking who the inexperienced agents are that don't know these things, right? But how many of you guys have gotten like a copy of the inspection report sent over to you after an inspection saying, here's all the problems, fix them? Y'all seen that? That's an inexperienced buyer's agent. They're killing the deal, right? If you make that mistake, 99 times out of 100, that deal's dead, right? So we coach our clients and we say, hey, we're looking for big safety things, big ticket items. But if a cracked wall plate is mentioned on here, that'll cost you, I I don't know, 30 cents at Lowe's or Home Depot, we don't put that in an addendum, right? You go after closing because now you're a homeowner and you put your big boy pants on and you go to Home Depot and you buy the wall plate. You cover it. You replace the light bulbs, right? We don't negotiate for these ticky-tack items. It's the inspector's job to find them all, everything that they can, but we don't negotiate everything. We're looking for big ticket items. We're looking for safety items where we don't want to move our family in unless these things are fixed. Okay. So we're a good buyer's agent. We coach our clients accordingly. And then we've got different ways. So now we've got a few things that need to be addressed, right? Maybe there's a safety concern and maybe they found, we had a CE class last week from a plumber and we talked about water heaters. And so maybe we find that the water heater is bad. It's leaking carbon monoxide into the home, right? Carbon monoxide. Yeah, I think that's right. So it's leaking carbon monoxide into the home. Now that's a safety concern. We don't want to sleep in that home. The sellers are sleeping in that home and it's not to the point where any of them have died yet, but that's a big concern to us, right? So we've got a couple of options here. First option that we can check is seller and buyer agree to accept the property as provided in sections 10.2 and 10.3, which means we're taking it pretty much as is. And they're going to give us, the cost of a new water heater, maybe $2,000 to be applied at buyer's discretion toward any or all of the following: permanent reduction or temporary reduction in the mortgage loan interest rate, mortgage financing costs, closing costs, prepaid escrows. Again, it's that same language that we just saw in the closing cost addendum, right? Any unused can be used to reduce the purchase price. And then here's the fun thing. And we just had an agent successfully argue with an underwriter of all things. Because the underwriter came back and said, hey, it's not clear. You've got this previous addendum that says you're paying $10,000 in buyer's closing costs. And then you've also added this resolution of due diligence addendum where it says $2,000. So are you paying $10,000 or $2,000 or $12,000? Which is it? We think you need to add another addendum. This is the lender telling us you need to add another addendum clarifying it. And the agent pushed back and said, read the last line of section 1. Okay. If in a prior addendum to the REPC, seller has agreed to pay an amount towards buyer's closing costs, the amount shown in this section 1 above shall be in addition to the prior contribution. We don't need to add an addendum clarifying how much is being added. It's already written into our language. And guess what? Miracle of miracles, the underwriter said, okay, that works. And it's resolved, right? So that's awesome. That's a really good understanding of this first section. And why is this in order of preference? Because now we've got a water heater that needs to be replaced. And anybody that's done this business for any significant amount of time, hold on, I've got to, okay. Anybody that's done this business for any significant amount of time has had times where they've negotiated for repairs to be completed by the seller. Now that's option 3. Out of 3 options, that's our worst. Let's talk about why that's our worst option first. How many of you guys that have had repairs made by a seller have had your buyer call you back after closing and say, hey, we think they did a crap job, right? We think they did this themselves. We don't think they hired a contractor. We don't. And by the way, a lot of times they didn't used to hire a contractor. So if you jump down to this section, it does specify that things have to be done with contractors, right? We're going to do the work with the contractor to complete these repairs, including permits, all of that required stuff, right? But that's one of the big common arguments. Hey, we don't think they did a great job. And sure enough, most of the time they didn't. It's a seller leaving the house. They're not investing in their future. They're trying to get by with the minimum that they can. And so they hire somebody to do the job as cheaply as possible. And most of the time the buyers aren't super happy about it and it creates future problems. So this is our last choice. So let's jump up and see why these 2 choices are better. Okay, we need a new water heater. knowing that we need a new water heater and knowing that maybe we want to make sure that warranty, we don't have a question of whether it transfer from the old homeowner to the new homeowner, whatever. We just want to make sure we don't have any of those issues. We just say, look, you contribute some to our closing costs. That frees, because that's normally cash out of pocket for me, right? Now I have that cash free where when I move in as the buyer, I've got that $2,000 extra cash because the seller helped me out covering my closing costs. Now I can go out and hire my own contractor and get it done the way I want to get it done. Somebody that I trust, a relationship with a business that I trust, that I like their warranty, whatever. I can do the work the way that I want it done, and I can have the warranty that covers me and protects me. That's why that's the best selection out of all of these things on this list, is because you have less problems after closing. Okay. But let's say that this isn't an option because the work has to be done. Or let's say maybe we've already negotiated for $10,000 in closing costs, prepaids, all that stuff. And they're like, we really can't use it. Like, they've already agreed for $10,000 of closing costs. That covers everything for us. We don't have any other way we can utilize that. So we're going to get a purchase price reduction. We've got cash in the bank. We can replace that water heater ourselves after closing. We're not worried about having the cash on hand to make the repairs, but we still want the cash equivalent of it. And so we're going to reduce our purchase price. So instead of 600, we're going to go to 198. 98, right? The new purchase price is reduced to 198 from 200. Now, again, very clean. And we just go to the sellers and we say, look, we'll take care of this after closing. It's going to cost us a couple $1,000. So we want to keep it clean and we're going to do this. Now, what if it's a safety hazard and we're like, hey, we do not dare move into the home until that work is done. That work needs to be done before we close. We want to make sure it's done. Again, this is our worst case scenario. We don't love this scenario. If the other two are an option, we'd prefer to use those. But we come down here and we say the new hot water heater to be replaced, whatever. Okay, the old hot water heater, whatever language we put in here, right? So now we've put this in here, and I guess we don't need new. We just say hot water heater to be replaced. So we put this in here, and of course we can have problems later on because they replace a 50-gallon with a 40-gallon. We're like, hey, that's not right. And again, problems that we wish we never had. But this is what they've asked to have done. So here's the thing. Let's talk about the practical application of this form and how to best do it. So if I know that the hot water heater needs to be replaced, I'm the buyer's agent. First of all, I do not want to wait until the last day of my due diligence to get that inspection done and find this out and to negotiate this. Like, I typically give my clients 2 weeks for inspections. I want my inspections done in the first 3 days. Like, I get on with my inspector as soon as we're under contract. We've got inspections scheduled and we're going out immediately. And that gives me a full week and a half to negotiate these repairs and see what we can get done, right? So we go through all our inspections, and it comes out this hot water heater is a serious safety risk, and we need to make sure that it's replaced. Otherwise, I'm not comfortable moving my family into this home at closing, right? So it's got to be done prior to closing. So what I want to do, this is best practice now, is I'm going to call up the listing agent and say, hey, all right, we've gone through everything. There's a number of problems on the inspection report. Most of them my client feels confident that they can take care of after closing. There is one thing that they said is a significant safety risk. They're not willing to close without that being done. And that's the hot water heater. Are you willing to replace the hot water heater? Right? And maybe just for fun, give you an example of a bad way to do it. Hot water heater to be replaced and new furnace also, because while they're out there, while the HVAC guys are out there, might as well negotiate for that too, right? So we Let's talk about the wrong way to do it first. The wrong way to do it would be this right here. I type it up, and without talking to the listing agent, I send it over as a counter offer, okay, or as an addendum, right? Let's say we're already accepted under contract. I send this over as an addendum. I want this added to the contract. We need to get these replaced. That is not the way to handle it. That is the wrong way to handle it. And I'll tell you why. Okay. So now we get in this back and forth. And the seller comes back and says, there's nothing wrong with the furnace. We just had that replaced a couple of years ago. Well, the inspector said it was really dirty. Okay, well, we'll have it cleaned. You know, we're willing to pay somebody to come out and have it cleaned, but we're not going to replace it. So now the seller does a counter offer to this and says, hey, in section 3, they mentioned a hot water heater and a new furnace. We're not going to replace the furnace. We're just going to get the furnace cleaned. Okay, so we're negotiating back and forth. Here's the problem with that a new agent doesn't realize, and a lot of experienced agents don't realize, is that all of this addendum, let's say that this is addendum 3, and they counter with addendum 4 that says we're not going to replace the furnace, we're just going to get it cleaned. And then everybody signs off and says, okay, yay, we agree to addendum 4. Yeah, addendum 3 and 4 now to the contract. We're going to get a new hot water heater, and the furnace is going to be cleaned prior to closing. And then they send this to this two new addenda to the lender. The lender submits it all to the underwriter, and the underwriter says, whoa, some problem with the furnace? We think we need to have that furnace checked out and possibly replaced. And buyers and sellers are both like, no, it, Mr. Lender, underwriter, sir, ma'am, whatever. We negotiated that we just needed to have it cleaned. We did ask for it to be replaced, but we don't need that. We just need it cleaned. And the underwriter says, I don't think so. That's a big item. It affects the habitability of the home. I don't think so. Now, as a requirement for me to give you the loan, to approve this loan, I'm going to require that an expert contractor goes out there, inspects that furnace independently, and determines whether or not it's okay, right? And of course, that contractor goes out, and this, by the way, adds on time to your closing. So now maybe you can't meet your closing deadlines, which could jeopardize your transaction. Maybe that contractor goes out, maybe they're a good contractor, maybe they're not. And they say, oh yeah, this needs to be replaced because I need to make some money, right? Or these parts are bad and we need to do these parts. And the underwriter says, sorry, I don't care that you've negotiated addendum 3 and addendum 4 and you're happy with that solution. I'm going to require that new furnace be, or that furnace be replaced before we give you that money. And all of a sudden, your negotiating power is taken away from you by an underwriter. And that's very frustrating. And that happens when we start to negotiate these repairs in writing, right? So let's talk about the proper way to do it, and then I'll give you a little bit of a warning as well. So the proper way to do it is I call up, I'm the buyer's agent. We just had our inspection done. I call up the other party and I say, hey, and I can send them an email as well. It doesn't matter. And I say, hey, we just had our inspection done. Here's our 2 major concerns, the furnace and the hot water heater. Listing agent says, okay, let me talk to my clients. I'll get right back to you. They talk to their clients and they say, hey, we just found out that the furnace is, it was replaced 3 years ago. It's fairly new. We're pretty confident there's no problem with it, but we'll get it cleaned. The hot water heater, yeah, we can see that that's an issue. And, our family's going to be sleeping there for another 3 weeks before this closes. So it's in our best interest to get that done too. So we'll agree to replacing the hot water heater. We'll get on that immediately. And the furnace will have cleaned. Right? So now we've had this back and forth verbally or by email or whatever. We've come to an agreement over what we're going to do. And this is why I like this language up here. Seller and buyer agree as follows. We want that agreement to already be done. We don't want to be negotiating the agreement here. Because whatever we negotiate back and forth, an underwriter sees it and may take away that decision from us. Now, if this sounds like, if this is ringing alarm bells in the back of your mind and you're thinking, hey, this sounds a little bit like loan fraud, like a double contract. We're negotiating outside the contract. And so we've got a separate agreement, that isn't part of the main agreement, and I think that's called loan fraud. Your answer would be yes, that is loan fraud to have a separate agreement that isn't part of your main agreement. But that's not what we're doing. We are coming to an agreement outside of the contract, and then that agreement that we've made is not a separate agreement because we are incorporating it into the contract. Once we have an agreement, now we put it in writing and furnace to be professionally clean, right? We've all agreed to this. Even if an underwriter sees it and says, hey, I want to make sure this is all done prior to closing, great, no problem. That's what we've agreed to. All of this stuff should be done prior to closing. Does that make sense to everybody? We are not creating a separate agreement that the underwriter doesn't see. We're not trying to defraud the lender, loan fraud. There's nothing separate. We're getting our negotiations done up front, whether by email or over the phone. We're coming to an agreement first, and then we're putting that agreement into the contract rather than negotiating back and forth in the contract, which creates potential future problems. All right. So that brings us down now to 3.1. 3.1, by the way, only comes into play if we've used checkbox 3. So, and by the way, it's not just one box that I have to choose. I could do a combination of these if I wanted to. Again, the cleanest way is just 1 or 2, but I can do a combination if I want. But if I'm using 1 or 2, then 3.1 doesn't apply to me. So let's say that we're using 3. So let's read 3.1. If as of the settlement deadline, the repairs have not been completed. Maybe the contractor got sick, they got a flat tire on their way over, couldn't get the part in, whatever. Then the buyer may enter into an escrow agreement with the seller approved by the lender. So again, the lender would have to approve this because maybe these repairs have to be done before the lender will release the loan, to finish the repairs after closing. So they have an option to go ahead and close and just have that work done afterwards if the lender allows that. In the event the seller and buyer cannot agree on the escrow, or if it is not approved by the lender, then the buyer may alternatively elect one of the following remedies, A or B below, right? And if it's not checked, then escrow is the sole remedy for incomplete or unfinished repairs. So let's say that if we don't check anything, escrow is the sole remedy. Otherwise, we have the option to check A or B. And that says that we can cancel the purchase contract because they didn't get the work done like they said they would. And if applicable, the seller, because they're the ones that failed to get the work done, they can pay liquidated damage to the buyer upon demand, right? And that liquidated damage is spelled out as the earnest money deposit. So again, if we look at default in the terms of the real estate purchase contract, let's jump down there for the purpose of the deep dive. Go really quick because I need to be wrapping this up for time. But if we scroll all the way down here and we go to the default section 16, there are 3 different remedies available. One is retaining the earnest money. Okay, and in this case, we're talking about a seller default because they didn't get those repairs done. So seller default, they didn't get the repairs done in time. There's a couple of options: return the earnest money and an equivalent amount as liquidated damages, right? That's option A. Option B is keep the earnest money in trust and sue to enforce the purchase contract. Option C is return the earnest money and sue for other remedies available at law, which is usually actual damages, not just the amount of the, so let's say I've got $1,000 earnest money and I feel like my actual damages are $10,000. Well, I can give back the earnest money and go after the $10,000 that I think I'm due, right? But in this case, okay, that's for a default. In this case, we are saying, look, you don't have options. You don't have those B and C options. You only have option A. That is, you can cancel the REPC. In addition to the return of the earnest money, if applicable, you accept from seller as liquidated damage, meaning this is your only remedy, a sum equal to the earnest money deposit. Seller agrees to pay the liquidated damage to the buyer upon demand. Okay, so you don't have those other 2 options in case this work wasn't done in time. You just have this one option. Super clean, keeps it clean, stops the arguments. And again, if you have an attorney draft this stuff up, these are details they miss, and your clients end up in court afterwards. The other option that they have is, if allowed by the lender, Okay, they can complete the purchase of the property and then pursue other remedies available after closing. Again, they've got a contract where they said these things would be done, they weren't done, so they can go back and they can sue after closing, which means this section needs to survive closing. And if they do that, then that's, they've got either option available to them there, right? And then we get down to section 4, and it says, upon acceptance of this addendum, the buyer's objections to the due diligence shall be deemed resolved, and the due diligence condition is waived unless checked below. And then you're saying it's not waived. So basically, the nice thing about this is we say up here, look, we've already come to an agreement, talked about it beforehand. The only thing that we want is this. We're not going to keep coming up with little things again and again and again. Every time we walk through, we take our aunt through, we take our grandma through, everybody's got their opinion of what we need to get done. We're not going to keep hounding you for repairs. If you'll just give us these things that are very important to us, then we will say that we have met all the due diligence conditions, right? So that's a really nice one. We don't check this box. We say, look, you give us what we want and we're good to go. We're moving ahead. That's a really nice addendum there. Okay. So with that said, hopefully this made sense to you guys. Anytime we do the deep dives, I worry a little bit because we do go down the rabbit holes. We jump, we're going from the law, we're going to different forms that were mentioned and referenced and stuff. But the goal of it all is for you guys to see and hopefully gain an immense amount of respect for the forms that are created for us. The attorneys do a good job. Okay. They're very good at their craft. They know what they're doing. The UAR attorneys anyways, right? When we find problems with those forms, they're pretty good at adjusting those. And so that's one of the reasons I encourage you as a regular practice to get in there and read your forms. 30 minutes to an hour a day, 30 minutes to an hour a week for experienced agents, 30 minutes to an hour a day for brand new agents, because those forms are constantly being updated. Okay. Some attorney finds some little point in there and they're able to make an argument or draw things out. We fill up that hole, we patch that crack in that foundation of that contract, and we release it again to you guys. And you guys have a better tool than ever before, as long as you know about it. So again, today, the point is, you guys, you have incredible value that you can provide to your clients. This is one of the ways that you provide that. There's lots of ways that you do it, through negotiations, through marketing efforts. There's lots of ways that you guys provide value to your clients. This is a fantastic one. You can save your clients literally tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars by knowing your forms, knowing the problems that they solve, and making sure that you're using them correctly. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this today, and for joining me. And for those of you that couldn't join me live, thanks for watching the recording all the way through. Good information.